It's a new day.
Reverend Robert Taylor, a spiritual leader and writer in our community, is here next to talk about what we can all gain from the various spiritual traditions all over the world. We'll be right back. Thank you, guys. Welcome back. Our next guest is an intriguing man whose journey has taken him from the battle against apartheid in South Africa to the Episcopal priesthood. As a young protege of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Robert Taylor was at the crossroads of history in the South African struggle for human rights. His life story is so rich that he was the inspiration for a complex character in the play The Thin Place that wrapped up this past weekend at the Intiman Theater. Today, his thoughtful writings on leading a spiritual life, whether or not you embrace a specific religion or church, are touching many lives in a tumultuous world. Please welcome lecturer and author Robert Taylor. Hello there. How you doing? Good to see you. In the interest of full disclosure, you're a very good friend and a spiritual mentor for me in many ways, because your thoughts are so very deep and touch me a great deal. So I want to say that up front. But let's talk about your background just a little bit. You were born in South Africa and at a very early age got involved in the anti-apartheid movement. What was that like?
Well, it was life-changing for me. I think one of the gifts of being involved in the anti-apartheid movement was that I learned a lot about what it meant to grow up in a very turbulent society. I had, as a teenager, 2 very unsuccessful spinal surgeries and had an experience of physical healing. And I've taken many lessons from that over the years. One was obviously my delight in the physical healing, but the other was that churches invited me to speak about it, and all of the churches were black. So here was this white boy, the age of 16, going into the heart of black South Africa, something that just didn't happen in the apartheid society. And what I discovered were wonderful, rich lives, people committed to peaceful change, who had hope and resilience in the midst of terrible humiliation and injustice. And so one of the lessons that I learned is that healing is always present in our lives, and there are opportunities for healing of relationships, and for us to be part of really polishing and changing the world.
The idea that you were a protege of this enormous figure, Desmond Tutu, is of course an important thing about your life. But what I find in you and in him and in the things that you write about is this great affirmation of life and an appreciation for other people, other cultures, other religions. And so it's been very important to you to draw from all of that to offer spiritual support to other people. Why, as an Episcopal priest, have you been so willing to embrace other religions?
I think some of that comes out of the South African experience, growing up in the midst of great diversity. I'm very clear that my tradition is the Christian one, and I am, as you said, a priest in the Episcopal Church, and that's what I'm rooted in. And yet I've also found such incredible wisdom in many traditions. I find myself deeply enriched by the Buddhist emphasis on compassion and what it means to seek happiness for all people. And yet,
not just ourselves.
And not just ourselves. And I don't see that as being in conflict. Instead, it really enriches my own sense of my own tradition. And I'm very grateful for that.
We know that we're not big churchgoers in Washington State and Oregon. I can't remember if we're 49th and they're 50th or the other way around, but the point is we're at the end of the pack. Yeah. And yet, lots of people will say, well, I may not be religious, I don't feel like I'm a big fan of organized religion, but I'm spiritual. And you have talked to me before about how many people say that to you. What do you think that means about us?
Well, I think there are many ways to look at it. On some level, I believe that we're all spiritual people, and that we're all on a path of making sense of meaning in our own lives and purpose, and we're seeking happiness, and we're seeking joy, and we're after peace, both within our own lives and, yes, perhaps in the world. And so it's a journey that's always unfolding before us. I remember in South Africa in 1977, Steve Biko, a major leader, was murdered by the South African government, and I organized an 8-day fast in the build-up to his funeral. And on about the 4th or the 5th day of the fast, I said to the group that gathered every morning for meditation and for conversation and prayer, I said, what if we went to Biko's funeral? And as I said it, I thought, you're crazy. What have you just uttered? And so we actually ended up going to this football stadium of, 30-some thousand people. We were among 200 or 300 whites in the crowd. And I think the lesson for me in all of that was that sometimes we're spiritually present, as in the fast, praying for something, hoping for something that would be peaceful and more just, more loving, more compassionate. But being spiritually present also invites us to be physically present to one another. And I think one of the lessons of that for me, and I think a lesson that many of us are seeking to learn more about, is that we're often not present to our own lives. And so I think one of the invitations of the spiritual journey is how to be more present to ourselves and to others.
Well, two things quickly. I know that that was the place where Tutu said that we needed to pray not only for Biko, but for the people who had murdered him. And I was a teenager, I remember hearing that, and it changed my life, that thought, the depth behind it. And to know you were there just gives me goosebumps. Yeah. But what you're saying about being aware of our own lives leads me to your wonderful website and a weekly spiritual newsletter that you're putting out now. And why are you doing that?
Well, the website is certainly focused on the speaking engagements that I'm doing around the country and some of that. And then my blog site really is a place for blogging about really the questions of what it means for us to wake up to the fullness of life and to live life fully, which I think is really what the spiritual and the human quest is about. And then the weekly wake-up call goes out every Sunday morning, and it's a meditation and a thought for some grounding in the course of each week, with some very sort of practical call to action steps, simple things to incorporate into the course of each day.
That anybody can do, and you can do right away. And they've saved me more than once. I don't know why, but these newsletters come at the exact right time for me, about the point that I'm thinking, I can't do whatever it is. Pops an affirmation
I'm
that
so
helps me
through,
and
Margaret.
I appreciate that. And you have a new future ahead of you as well, with a new position. Is that all solidified?
Well, yes, I last Friday, just 3 days ago, became the new chair of the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation, and so that's interesting work and interesting to continue to be engaged with the legacy of this remarkable man. You know, when he was in Seattle recently, I hosted a breakfast conversation between him and the Dalai Lama, and we knew
just something small, little breakfast deal.
Well, there were about 450 guests, and we knew that the Dalai Lama was going to be late because of his morning meditation practice. So Archbishop Tutu and I were sitting on a platform at one of the hotels in town, and there were all of these people in the room, and so he and I started the conversation, and then the Dalai Lama walked into the room a little earlier than expected and sort of sauntered through the crowd, and his chair was right next to Tutu's, and so he sits down and he smiles at everyone, and then he starts moving his left elbow like this, more and more insistently, poking Tutu in the ribs. And Tutu looked at him and he said, "What are you doing?" And the Dalai Lama kept poking him. And he looked at Tutu and he said, "You've put on weight. You've gotten fat." And Tutu looked at him and said, "You'd better start behaving yourself and acting like a holy man." And then they just collapsed into peals of laughter.
And they both laugh with such contagion.
Well, they do, and I think that the takeaway from that story is I think, a gift for each of us. That here are these two iconic people who deal with incredible levels of stress and have known great turbulence and adversity. And yet they have this capacity to find delight in something in every single day. And I think that we're each invited into that, to find some delight in our day, because it changes the way in which we engage with ourselves and with others and with each day.
With joy. Thank you so much.
Thank
you for joining
Margaret.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to read more or watch interviews with Robert on these topics, please visit his website, robertvtaylor.com. That's where you can sign up for the free e-newsletter, the weekly wake-up call, which I get and thoroughly enjoy. We'll also link you to all of his information on our own website, which is king5.com/newday. Now, when we come back, a unique gift idea for Dad.